So here we are today. Guest speaker here, or person to talk to, is Christina Stargazer, who's got this wonderful backdrop of the Blue Mountains in out of Sydney at the moment, away for the weekend, having a bit of fun up at Richard Sterling's house. Is that right?
That's right. Been hanging out with Richard. He's definitely here in spirit. Hi, Luke. How are you?
Good. How are you, Christina?
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, that's all right. Not a problem. I was looking forward to this. We've been trying to coordinate during a nice Mercury retrograde. It just didn't work, did it?
No, Mercury's gone direct now, so communications flows again.
So, look, I love your Stargazer shirt, but I'm thinking to myself, well, all right, for those who don't know who you are, give us a quick rundown on Christina and your involvement with astrology. You've been doing it for years. We've known each other for quite a while.
Yeah, and actually that's part of the reason why I'm up here. It's been 19 years since Christina Stargazer started teaching astrology. So I've had Christina Stargazer School of Astrology since the 27th of April, 2004.
There you go.
2005, I beg your pardon. Anyway, it's been 19 years. So I thought, what a better way to celebrate than, come up to the mountains. And as you know, Luke, by a series of wildly crazy, synchronistic events, totally brought up here by spirit. There's no other way to describe how this all unfolded. And that's a story for another day. But yeah, I found myself sitting here celebrating 19 years of teaching astrology in Richard Sterling's home. And it's such a beautiful, peaceful property, and there's such reverence.
Look at that backdrop. You're sitting there, like you're just around the corner from the Three Sisters. So we know exactly where that's located, up there in Katoomba, Lura way. But also, just quickly, some people out there, especially overseas, may not know who Richard Sterling is.
Okay, so Richard Sterling was born in 1926. He was an astrologer who wrote for the Women's Weekly for about 25 years.
Yes.
And this all follows on the back of a presentation that I gave for SARS a few weeks ago at the beginning of April. And Richard Sterling, being good friends with Ida Buttrose, was able to, she asked him to write astrology for the Women's Weekly. So there's been a few famous astrologers. There's still, you think of the media, Jonathan Cainers and the Athena Starwomans and the Richard Sterlings and the Milton Blacks. They all fit into that sun sign horoscope writing
especially
media.
In Australia, especially here in Australia.
Yeah, and to be frank, if you want to make good money in astrology, you got to hook up with someone like Ida Buttrose, or now that she's not the editor-in-chief of the Women's Weekly. So, that's most people have become famous. And Christina Stargazer was born probably in a similar vein, but it's actually Horary Astrology is what got me going. So I started
in the meantime. Yes.
Yeah, I think it was my girlfriend, and maybe sixth class, and her mum had an astrology book, like a coffee table book. Yeah. And I remember at the time I had a crush on this boy. He was a Scorpio, and I remembered looking up the compatibility between an Aquarian and a Scorpio.
That wouldn't have been great. So anyway.
Trying to figure that out. So it was just from that, I've always been intrigued and interested, but I wanted to, I've got Mercury in Capricorn. So, when I do something, I need to formalize things. So I wanted to formalize my astrological education. And, again, sitting reading the paper of a Saturday, making sure I wasn't in the death column and I was, and I saw this astrology classes advertised in Wollongong with Patricia Shepherd, and I thought, that sounds like a fun thing to do. And I didn't even speak. I just got up from the lunch table and picked up the phone and did. And my ex-husband said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've just I've enrolled in astrology classes." He was like, "Oh, okay, that's nice." So it sort of just went from there.
Yeah.
And then I decided to sit my qualifications and get my practitioner's certificate, because for me, without having all those formalized things, I was not the sort of person that would be able to practice.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I was. And so once I had that certificate and I had those quals, then I sort of off I went. And part of once you finish the practitioner's course, and that's what I tell my students, is that, it's like becoming a GP. And then once you become a GP, you can go off and do pediatrics, or you can do obstetrics, or whatever you want. Like there's different branches, midwifery. And then I thought, so obviously with that specialist technique exam, you have to do a little taster of all those subjects. And out of all of them, mundane astrology, I don't know if it's just a guy thing, Luke, but I find it, at the time it was really boring. I have to teach it, but, mundane is just a play on words. But I thought, no, I loved horary. I felt like it was something that I could run with that was a practical application for horary because, let's face it, no one comes to see us when, they're in a great mood. Woo, life's good and I'm here to see what's happening in my life. Some people do, but not many.
Yeah,
the majority of people that come to us as clients, I find generally are usually in a tricky space and wanting to know what's going to happen and when it's going to be over. And I think personally, sometimes day in, day out, that can get a bit like, it comes with a lot of neediness and a lot of people wanting all the answers. And if I had all the answers, I'd own this house. I wouldn't be sitting here on the veranda. It's an interesting thing. You can only go with the transits that you can work with what you've got to the best of your ability. I'm doing okay, but that you've got to have it in your chart natally. To be a millionaire, it's got to be embedded in there somewhere. So, people saying when am I going to win the lottery? If I had $1 for every time I've been asked that question, I'd be rich just on that alone.
Yeah. Well, I'll interject there for a second. I had a situation the other day. We've got the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, and I was sort of having this feeling that at the moment I should just check out family's charts. And I looked at my brother's, and he had that sitting right on his sun. And although it's a bit of an interesting one because he's got Aquarius rising. And I looked at the whole thing. I thought, Jupiter, okay, it does co-rule Pisces. Yeah. Well, so I rang him up and I said, look, go and take out some lotto tickets. If you're ever going to win, it might be now. Now, that was a fairly general sort of statement. Has he won? I don't think so. But, I'm not too sure. But, hey, give it a go. It's all of that sort of stuff. As you said, it's got to be in the natal chart. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. I've got a few theories on that one as to how that might work. But I thought, look, if I don't tell him, and this is part of the issue, if you don't say something and the opportunity's come and gone, then you'd feel worse.
Yeah. So I think for me, horary and electional are the two branches or avenues of astrology that really resonated with me because I felt they had like a practical application. I could see a literal outcome, a bang for my buck.
So give people a bit of an understanding of what is horary astrology, because I reckon there's a lot of people out there, even who know astrology, would have no idea what that means.
Of course. So people do get, and even my students from time to time, they do get confused. I'm like, horary and electional are very different. Electional is electing a time to hold a particular event. It's an event. It's, when do I get married? Those. Whereas with horary, it's the art of asking a question. So people, where shall I live? What's happening? It's and teaching the subject is actually quite a huge difference because it's a traditional technique. So you use traditional planets. However, I'm an Aquarian. And I find it very difficult to take those, and I've been poo-pah'd by some of the traditionalists for actually leaving in Uranus, Neptune and Pluto in my charts. But for me, they're in my consciousness. And when I do a horary chart and I can think to myself, wow, Pluto's on the midheaven of this chart and the person's asking a career question, I can't ignore that on any level.
No.
So I'm a bit like, typically Saturn's my traditional ruler.
Because as an example, for those who don't know, Pluto sitting on the midheaven of a chart represents you're going to go through a major career change.
100%.
And generally speaking, you may come out and do a completely different career to what you've ever done before. So you
exactly.
Cannot ignore
and so
something.
If I ignored that in a horary, I could actually be leading someone completely up the garden path, so to speak. So that's just for me. That's
I'll have another little interjection. So for those who don't know, when Christina's talking about traditional planets, astrology was only born out of the fact we had 7 planets that we could physically see from Earth. So we only worked all the way out to Saturn, and that was it. And it wasn't until Uranus, Neptune, with Pluto were discovered, centuries and, well, actually not that long ago. So 1700s for Uranus and the 1800s for Neptune and 1900s for Pluto, that they've been added in, and then we've worked with their cycles to work out what's going on. But these techniques of horary astrology go way back to the ancients, and they are literally, like Christina's saying, is you ask a question at that moment in time, and then you look at the chart to find out how and what, and it has a slightly different view. So the houses mean different things. The planets will have a certain connotation within each house that they fall in at that point in time of the question, and that's what makes it extremely interesting. And like you said, this is a specialised form of astrology. It's not. It is. It's not the mill interpretation of somebody's personality.
No, not at all. So, like for me being an Aquarian, Luke, I bow to the feet of Saturn because he's my traditional ruler. I've got Uranus constantly tapping me on the shoulder, but what about this? Consider that. What about that wild idea? So I've got that. I've got to include both of them, or I'm not being true to myself. So I'm not, there's horary astrologers out there that do wonderful things with their techniques, but for me, this is I just always include the outer planets.
And when you teach horary, do you do that as well? Do you include it in your
teaching? Absolutely, yeah. And I'll be starting to actually do some work up here in the Blue Mountains. So I'll be holding astrological retreats, and one of them will be like a horary intensive. So
that's awesome.
I can share some details, because for me, working in this space is just amazing. That's the subject for another day. So after I finished all my exams, we had a woman named Anne Elliott. You probably have heard of Anne. I think she's living in New Zealand now. And she had she publishes books. I think it's called Stanley Books or something like that, memory serves me correctly. And so Anne would come down to Wollongong. I don't know, we'd get her down once a month or something, and she would, or once every 2 months, and she would do like a horary day, and I'll probably do something similar, because it is such a massive subject. And whilst we, generalize with the sun signs, what they mean in a birth chart, they're a little bit different when you're looking at them in a horary and an electional chart. The meanings are the same, but sometimes slightly different. So I did this 8-week course with Anne, or 8 sessions, not over 8 weeks, but it was 8 sessions. And I remember it was in the July, and at the time, all the kids were still living at home, and I'd finished it, and I thought, school holidays, and the radio came on, and it was just the local radio station, and I was laying there listening. I thought, oh gosh, I don't have to jump up and make lunches or anything, and I'll just lay here a bit longer. And the announcer said something like, oh, I've lost my wallet, I don't know where it is. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. He goes, if anybody out there, I've got Jupiter in the 5th, so, call it opportunistic. I don't care. I think I use my opportunities for good rather than gain, but, that's still Jupiter. And I thought, I'll just go downstairs and see if I can do this horary thing. So I went down, put the kettle on, put the computer on, I sat down and I wrote, where is Dave's wallet? Looked at the chart. I thought, just use so, you've got what they used to call, William Lilly is probably all astrologers base horary. Lilly's work he was the guy, he wrote his book in 1676, I think it was, and it was called Christian Astrology, and he was the guy that predicted the London fires, and then his prediction came to fruition, and then he had to promptly predict his way out of jail because he got locked up for the starting of the London fires. Poor guy. Anyway, so yeah, and you know what? Julia and Derek Parker, when I was at their place one day, they've got an original copy of Lily's work with all handwritten notes. Wow. I nearly fainted, but anyway. So I had a look at the chart and I thought, had my cup of tea and conjured up. I've been a bit of a, when the radio rings and say, what's this song? Or, I've been known to do that sort of thing. So it didn't worry me. I just rang the station. I said, look, I'm a local astrologer. I'm doing some work. I think I could help Dave find his wallet. If he wants to call me back, here's my number. Anyway, 9:30, 10:30, 11:30, hadn't heard anything. I thought, oh, well, they're not interested. So, and then at 2:30 that afternoon, I got a call from Dave and he said, okay, I've had enough. Where's my wallet? Can't find it. So I went through just a few basic techniques. So in Horary, what you do is you're looking at techniques and you're looking at, okay, so it's here, it's there, this means that. That means if you look out the window, you'll see a new building being erected, and this means da 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 da, and that means da 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 da. So
the basic formula, is that right?
We call them, Lily called them considerations. So they're considerations before judgment. And, like back in the day, astrologers, you literally lost your head if you got it wrong, because the only person that could afford to see the astrologer was the king.
Or the queen.
Really?
Yeah.
Queen, king, queen.
You were the heads of the church.
The heads of the church, the theologians of the time, exactly. So, and you made decisions about, should we go to war? Will I get married, and will there be an heir to the throne, and will we be rich? And they were the sort of basic questions that the astrologer had to answer. So they built in what we call strictures to make sure that if there's certain things and they were a bit iffy about it, they would say, if it was this, the chart was not safe to judge. So I went through all the strictures, I went through all the considerations, and basically I said, look, it's this, it's that, it's with men's things, it's moving around, da 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 da, all the typical, because when I do a horary, I sit down with the chart and generally a cup of tea, and I go through. There's 8 things to say you'll get it back, and 2 things to say you won't. So if I'm looking for a lost item, for instance. And so, you might be telling the person all of this. So I shared it with Dave. I said, this. At 2:35, 5 minutes later, he rang me back and he goes, oh, my Lord, I found my wallet. It was exactly where you said. And so from that, like the next day, it was like constant.
Okay, where was it?
It was I said it was in his bedroom. So he'd actually done some washing the day before, got the washing off the line or something, chucked his washing and his wallet in the basket, put it on the spare bed, and that's where it was. So obviously when he tipped the basket over and the men's things, I said to him, oh, yuck, all your socks and undies. But anyway, they were clean. And he was like going through them, and there it was. It was, there was indications to say it was an old wallet and it was, of sentimental value. You can tell the colour. It was dark, probably leather. And so he said, yes, it is a dark wallet. It is. It was sentimental. An old girlfriend gave it to me. And I said, oh, well, there are moths coming out of it. Like, we went through all those funny things. They actually interviewed me the next day. So it's sort of, and like when I look at the chart, it projected me out into, I wouldn't say stardom, but it certainly gave my astrological career a leg up. Yeah. And so from that, they asked me, would I go? I think at the time there was a chick called Beck Star was writing the Daily Stars on Wave FM, and I think it was a national thing. And so she wasn't doing it anymore, and they asked me, would I record the star signs for every day and just do it 5 days a week and come over to the studio and then do 60 and like for a week. And I said, look, I'd be bored. You'd come into the studio, I'd be dead on the floor from boredom. Like, so they put all the recording equipment into my home, into my office, and I used to write the stars and record them, and they would play them. And that didn't last for very long because, you've got to have a voice for radio. And I had trouble pronouncing my P's, 66, clickety click. You've got to be able to have the speak. I loved writing them, but they were, radio stations and magazines, they've got an angle that they want. And so for me being a bit airy-fairy and, think they wanted more practical things. But but from that, they said, look, you need a name like Beck Star or something. I was like, oh God, really? And anyway, the Dave rang me and he goes, oh, Athena Starwoman passed away, so why don't you be Christina Stargazer? I said, that'll do. So I literally jumped in the car, drove to the registry, like where you registered your business name, because back then you didn't do it online, and registered Christina Stargazer, and here we are. Boom, boom.
There you go. And you've got it on the car too.
Yeah, I've got my Stargazer car parked in the front of Richard Sterling's driveway. I tell you, I
Yes.
took a photo. I was like, that's a keeper. It's
So
really
look,
fun.
so Horary Astrology, as you can see, you started just testing the waters, basically.
Here I did.
Yeah, just testing the waters.
Yeah.
You know, from a random wake up and Dave's lost his wallet, and then you actually worked out where it was. So,
Yeah.
in a practical sense, how like can people use horary in their day to day for this sort of thing, or would you find that a little bit? Yeah, like you said, the ancients would tend to do it for the sort of the bigger questions in life, but you can use it for anything, really.
Oh, 100%. I've done it. My kids, like, they rarely, I think I've looked at all their charts, but they rarely will contact me only to say, Mum, can you check your almanac? I've lost my car keys or I've lost my phone, or, when it comes to those things.
Hilarious, yes. Yeah.
It is hilarious.
I get calls. I get calls from my son, saying, "Dad, I've met this girl." Okay, all right, that's for another time.
We've all had one of those
conversations. You really want to know,
Exactly.
You need
and
to be
so
choosing.
the difference for me is when someone says, Will, I want you to pick a date for me to get married. I'm not going to buy into that karma. I got enough of my own karma to deal with. Thanks very much. So I generally say to people, if you want to tell me 3 dates that you like, I'll look and I'll just tell you which is the most auspicious, but I'm not getting hooked up in someone else's karmic drama. I just don't need it. So
I'll tell you a little story about picking times, because I had going back to my brother.
Yep.
And this is going back many, many years ago. And he called me at a particular time and he said, look, just wondering, I'm thinking of getting married. Now, this is his partner that he's married to now. But at the time, he said to me, I'm thinking of getting married and around this time. And I'm sort of thinking of doing it near Linda's birthday and this sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I went through and I tried to find a date for them. Now, and I was looking and looking and looking, and I just looked and I just couldn't. I looked at the planetary aspects at the time, and I went, it's not great for marriage. Like, if that's when you want to do it, and it's hard to say to someone, like you just said, look, I don't think that's the greatest time. But this was very significant because her birthday was September the 10th.
Yeah.
And the year he was looking at was the situation in September 11.
Yeah.
And I've gone, I just could not pick a date. And I went, you know what? I wouldn't be doing it then. There's something going to go on worldwide. I'm not exactly sure what it is right now, but you're going to find there's a lot of distraction, a lot of issues. Now, can you imagine if I turned around and said, here, get married on the 12th of September?
Yeah,
or something like that. And all of a sudden, bingo, he's getting married at that time. And you can't even go on a honeymoon because everything's shut down. There'd be a whole other gamut of stuff. So I hear what you're saying. So someone gives you the dates and you can look at the times.
And for me, it's okay if you're going to elect something for yourself. Like, I've elected a few birthday parties for myself. And I remember my 40th, it was hilarious. I wanted it to be goddesses and gods. So I thought, Mars is in Aries and Venus is in Pisces. So everyone can just dressed as come as their goddess, and they're in a goddess and god. It was wonderful. But what I didn't pay attention to was Mars was in Aries on the midheaven. And I mean, this is when I was green. And that's how I say to my students, like, I like to call it with my classes astrology in action, but you've got to do it with things that aren't going to be, you're not going to, like a wedding, that's someone's life.
Yes.
But whereas, a party, what was the worst thing that was going to happen? And I remember driving up to the venue and there was all these stars on the ceiling. It was beautiful. Here's all these fire engines. I'm like, okay, Mars in Aries on the midheaven, rightio. That's how you learn well, I think, when you actually apply it.
Mars relates to fire, everybody who doesn't want that.
And especially Mars being in its own sign.
In its own sign of Aries, yeah.
So, like, as far as like horary and asking and, finding things, I think, Luke, that's probably something that we would want to consider, maybe doing some basic stuff as an introduction rather than today. But what I did want to say is that with horary, for me, when I first started, like you said, it wasn't very popular. I think John Frawley was had come out to Australia and was doing something. I did a little weekend workshop with John Frawley through AANSW. So AANSW is the Australian Association of Astrologers. The New South Wales Astrology Association. It's affiliated with the FAA. Yeah. And you know that I'm involved with the FAA. Again, I like to have, I'm an Aquarian. I like to take care of the group.
The FAA is the Federation of Australian Astrologers.
Astrologers, yeah. And so I'm on the committee of the New South Wales branch of that federation. And so as you know, you've done talks for SARS and for ANSW and for other orgs. And then this horary thing that I was really interested in, I was like, oh, what can I do? And so I really put myself out there. Like I did I remember that meeting that I asked Anita. I did it a couple of times and I asked people to hide things. But the funniest one was Anita hid a chocolate. It was Easter. And I bought a beautiful lint, one of those gold lint bunnies. And I asked Anita and everyone to hide it so that I didn't know where it was. And then in the meeting, we just asked the question, like ill-prepared, typical Stargazer fashion, just do it on the fly, and where is the lint bunny? And I just thought, look, I've done this enough now that I had enough confidence to be able to trust that I could come up with something. Yeah. And so we looked at, and I was explaining, like the querent, I'm asking the question, I'm on the ascendant, the thing on the descendant is the quisited or what's being asked about. And so I knew what was lost. It was the lint bunny. So we went through this series of steps with everyone. And it turned out that Mercury was the significator or the planet that was describing the rabbit and where it was. And it was retrograde. And I said, well, in horary, when I'm doing a horary for somebody and they've lost something, and I can tell you now I have done hundreds, anything that's retrograde is an absolute certainty that it's coming back. That's one bit of information I will impart today.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, I said, well, it made sense. Anita knew where it was. It was going to come back eventually, whether I was going to find it or she was going to find it or someone was going to find it. It was coming back.
She'd go pick it up out of where she put it.
Yeah, yeah. But the hilarious thing was when we did find it, I said it was up high. It was somewhere really hot. Anyway, they'd put it up in the rafter of the building, like on the rafter. Well, when it came back, it had imploded. It was retrograde. It had sort of like sunk in on itself. It was the best example of a horary I think I've ever done.
That's even better. So it's coming back, but it's not going to be the same form it was.
Absolutely. It was hilarious. It had sort of imploded in on itself and all the foil had sucked in and it was so funny. It was really fun. Back then, there were a couple of well-known astrological general books that actually, and I've still got copies at home, that when you read them, it was a very unfavorable thing to do because a lot of astrologers thought that it put, and I don't know what Richard Sterling might have thought of it, I'm not sure, but it put astrology into ill repute.
Yep.
That's what astrologers back in probably the earlier 40s, 50s, 60s thought about horary. It was not, it sort of went out of vogue. Then it's come back with a vengeance. And I'd like to think maybe I had something to do with it, at least in this country.
So, all right. So I do have a question now, and that is, so you talked or briefly, jumped on the fact that, when you're asking a question in horary astrology, the ascendant is the actual querent, the person asking the question, and the descendant is what you're asking about, correct?
But like the thing, what you are saying there, Luke, is the importance of asking a question, because what I find is sometimes, with the questions like, where is my wallet? That's a very practical, but like, is my husband having an affair? Oh, Lord. Like, that's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, yeah.
It's a loaded question, but people want to know that stuff. And like, but they don't ask, is my husband having an affair? They'll say something like, what's happening with the lady down in number 27? Like, and sometimes my first
that could be anything, couldn't it?
100%. So my first initial consultation with a client is trying to get to the root of the question. And that's an interesting thing. And the other thing that happens is people come to you and they're not sure what they want to know. But the minute you say, okay, so what's your question? Oh, I'd like to know if I should go to Japan.
Yeah.
And then you get a barrage of information. Oh, because I'm going there to see my mother whose sister's marrying a Grecian goddess or it just rolls on. And I'm like, stop. So sometimes it's finding the less information I have, the better. Because otherwise it colours my judgment.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that, especially in a question sense.
Yeah, 100%.
I use that in regards to tarot. When someone comes to me and they'll often say, oh, should I do? And I go, well, hang on a minute. It's not that simple as should I do? Which way, or which way should I go? Yes or no? It's often about things like laying it down and seeing what would happen if I did this and what will happen if I do that. That's a different sort of scenario. What you're doing is should I? That's a tough question as well.
100%, because, like in these days, like if you do NLP or any of those sort of things, neuro-linguistic programming, you've those sort of questions you don't, or any counselling model these days. And like astrology, you're wanting to use a counselling model because you're wanting to help the person come up with their own solutions rather than, like when I remember one time I was doing experiential astrology, and that's where you get people to jump on the circle and they experience their chart. And this chick said to me, oh, she was standing there. I put her where she was having the difficult transit on her natal chart laid out on the floor. And she pointed over there. And I said, so you want to go over there? She was pointing to Mercury. But without me saying to her, oh, you want to go over there to Mercury, I said, all right, well, you go over there and you pick up that. So she put the problem down and she went over and picked up the Mercury. And when she picked up Mercury upside down. I thought, oh, that's odd. I looked at her chart. She had Mercury retrograde again. And it was literally, she held it upside down. I've never, ever seen another person do that. And so I said to her, what do you think you need to do? And she said, I think I need to go and talk to somebody. Like, I love doing experiential astrology with people who know zero about astrology because they come up with their own words that are so appropriate. We don't have to be that clever. So, but like with horary, the problem is getting people to ask or get back into the mindset of asking closed questions. Whereas in psychology and counselling, you want to ask open questions. The whens, the hows, the how are you going to do? Whereas with the horary, you're saying, will I? Should I?
Yeah.
Could I? They're closed questions, and it's so, I think, become not fashionable to ask those closed questions. So trying to remember to get students to keep the question closed because you're wanting to get a yes-no answer in most cases. So formulating the question, I think, is the bigger part, because if you don't formulate your question well, you'll be looking all over the shop. Now, I had a lady contact me who wanted to know whether she had a Pandora bracelet that went missing, and she wanted to know if her cleaner had stolen it. And I was like, God, Lord, you can't. She was convinced the woman had stolen it. And I said, look, is she a good cleaner? Yep. I said, so you're going to sack a good cleaner? No. We need to find out where the bracelet is before she sacks a cleaner.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so we did the chart, and lo and behold, the bracelet was downstairs. So she'd come home one Saturday night, after a few wines, took her jewelry off in the dining room, chucked it in, I don't know, like a buffet drawer, and forgot completely, probably because had a few, forgot where it was. And here she was going to, this poor woman was going to get sacked and accused of stealing it. So what we did was we went through the chart and we looked at all the things. There were about 5 things to suggest that it had been stolen, and there were probably 6 or 7 things to say it hadn't. So That's what I said. Like, working out all those considerations is really important, because, you know, otherwise you can jump to conclusions. And I always say to my students now, it's hilarious. I'm like, stop speculating. With horary, there's rules. Stick to the rules.
Yeah. So I was going to say, just quickly, in that process, I mean, someone comes to you as a horary astrologer and says, you want to find something. How much time just going through those rules would you be spending on average just to get to the point of going, okay, now we can start working with a decision on where it is?
Well, dang, it's really, it takes me a while.
That's right.
You know, and there's all that argument
when you
between,
say a while, what I'm trying to get at here, Christina, is for people to understand what's involved. You know, is it half an hour? Is it a good 20 minutes? Is it an hour? Or is
it would be an hour minimum.
There you go. Okay. So therefore,
you know, and I've got to literally write down. I always print the chart out. I turn it over and I write considerations for, considerations against.
Against. Yep. Exactly.
Is my husband cheating? For, against. Mm-hmm. Is the dog coming home? For, against. Should I buy the house? For, against.
Yep.
You know, they're the big questions. And you've got to literally do those steps. Otherwise, the problem is you get, like in counselling, they call it transference.
Yep.
So when you see a client, you've got to be careful that you don't get hooked up in their hysteria, which, you know, we know the moon is about when we're hysterical.
Yep.
And so, you know, all of that transference, even with horary. And this woman, she rang me like she had a cat and the cat was missing. And I said to her, you know.
It can be very distressing for some.
Oh, it was very distressing for her. I went through all the considerations. I rang her back. I said, look, I hope the cat will be found, but not till at least 5:15 this afternoon. And like, she kept ringing me back. And I'm like, honey, I'm trying to work. Astrologers work 7 days a week. It never stops. And so she kept ringing me back. And in the end, I could feel myself like heightening and becoming really escalated, just the same as she was. And I can appreciate, but the thing was, she'd broken the rules and she wasn't meant to have a cat at the property. So I looked at the chart, the moon was in Sag. I said, look, go for a big wander over that side of the property. I thought, God, hopefully she'll use up some time and some energy, because my concern was that if she didn't, the cat wasn't returned by the time
you said
the moon got to Pluto, the cat was probably going to be deceased. That was my concern.
Okay.
And so she went for a walk and she wandered. She came back and she rang me again and she said, look, we've done that. Nothing, haven't found it. I said, please just wait till 5:15 this afternoon. At about 13 minutes past 5, she rang me screaming they found the cat. So what had happened, the cat, it was under a bed, which was Saturn. And like, that's another thing I've noticed over the years, Luke, is like the symbology of astrology is unbelievable.
Yes.
So to me, when I look at Saturn, like it's a cross and it looks like, you know, to me, I could pretend it was under a piece of furniture or something. And because it's Saturn, it's usually dark, a chair, dark timber. We went through all that. And I said to her, it's not far from you. Like, so lo and behold, the cat had run under the bed, knocked some books, I kid you not, cross my heart, this is a true story, knocked some books that they had that was holding up one leg of the bed. The bed fell and the cat got trapped under the bed. And it had been there for some time, like it had been missing for 24 hours because, you know, like you don't always hear from a person until they've explored all their options.
That's exactly right,
And so I said to her, if the cat was in the house and under the bed, why didn't you hear it? Again, another Mercury retrograde. She said, the cat has no meow. I was like, are you for real? The cat had no speech.
So if you didn't see it, you ain't going to find it.
Exactly. So, you know, the thing was, and she rang me exactly at that time.
With that happening, and there's books. Now, where was Mercury involved in that? And the collapse, was there a Mars Saturn thing going on? What's
There was it was Mercury, Saturn, Mars.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's the other wonderful thing is, like, one day when I got 5 minutes up my sleeve, like putting all these book charts together and compiling some sort of a book is definitely on my agenda. Yep. But right now, I'm busy with other things. But
so you're going to be teaching some horary, is that right?
I'm going to be doing some intensives here, at this property.
And would that be targeted at mainly people who are already astrologers? I would assume.
I'm going to do a couple of things.
So you're going to do those retreats up there in the mountains, or you're not sure?
Yeah, I will. Yeah, so I think I'll do some horary stuff, but I'm also going to do some introductory stuff as well.
Okay. All right. So you could be for any. And what about some experiential? Because we touched on that. So people who don't know what that is,
100%.
That's where we lay the chart down and we physically stand in our own chart, and you're going through basically looking at the different issues that are going on in the chart and feeling and experiencing what your chart is. I think that's an awesome, and you.
Oh, it's really cool.
It's a very good one.
I learned experiential astrology with Prampra. Did you ever meet Prampra?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So, I mean, she was awesome. She was fantastic. I feel so blessed to have had that training with her. So I did a facilitation workshop with her. So I've got my circle, and I've got my transits, and I've got I've got 2 sets of glyphs. One's for the transits, one for but like when we're finished, I'll show you behind me, like this astrological garden behind me is amazing. And like in the center is the Leo gazebo is it's such a sacred space to be in. And you can so feel Richard's presence down there. Apparently, Dahlia was saying he used to like to write in that space. So, this whole environment.
On another note, whole, I've still got it somewhere, and I actually found a copy, and I had to buy it again. But Richard Sterling did like you said, that coffee table book many, many years ago. But he also had one, and part of that was where he had all of the different words related to the different horses. So like when I say, like for horse racing, planetary, what the planets rule, I should say. So it's under, Mars could be fire, it's swords, it's this, it's that, whatever. And it was that particular book initially that I started using when I first did my astrology with horse racing to see if I could pick winners. I want to make sure that I had a good understanding what each, on a mundane level, especially mundane meaning, on a basic day-to-day basis, what the planets meant. And it was Richard Sterling's book that I used to start with. Now, since then, I now use this one, the rulership book, because it's got a lot more detail from Rex Bills.
Oh, Rexy E. Bills. I don't ask my students to buy too many books. Bernadette Brady's Eagle and the Lark would be 1. Ephemeris would be 2. Richard Sterling.
And the other one's
Robert Hand's Planets in Transit, and that one, Rex E. Bills. Yeah.
And that one too.
They're my favourites.
Combination of stellar influences. Yeah. That's the other one that I use. But so
just to finish off my story, Luke, I just wanted to say that currently I write a radio script for Grace Gibson Productions. So I've gone back and I write them, and they send them off to someone to produce them who's got a voice for radio. And so I do them 365 days. So they live up here in the Blue Mountains. So I caught up with them for the first time the other night, and we had dinner. It was so lovely. But the connections, like Ray Webb, as you know Ray and Kevin and Arthur, like they were all buddies. And so Richard was into punting. So I've got all this like going on in my head. I'm like, oh, but so they all knew each other. They all were able to, I just, like I said, the coincidences and the circumstances that have brought me here this weekend have been beyond my comprehension at the moment. I'm still trying to digest it all, but
we will also have to do an actual podcast for Melbourne Cup, and maybe a couple and a couple of the other big races in the US. I know we got the Breeders' Cup. Is it the Breeders' Cup or the Kentucky Derby this weekend?
I think it might be the Kentucky Derby. I'm not sure.
Kentucky Derby. There's a big one coming up. I'm going to be dealing with Robert on that one. I might even do an interview with him online and similar to this, because he's already sent me through who the horses are, and I've gone, okay, we better have a good look at that one.
for me, it feels like I'm coming full circle, but I'll definitely be doing some work here. I'm definitely be doing more experiential stuff. Yeah. So we can do it's just a great space to do all that.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
well, I'd like for, especially for those out there who want to learn astrology, this would be more hands-on in the Blue Mountains and an event with which they'd have to attend rather than something that's online. Are you looking to do any stuff where you could, where we could record it and we could put stuff out there as well?
Yep, definitely. Like I said, if I think we'll need to have a chat about like what, because there's the basics and there's just so much. Like it's like, like I said, becoming a GP is one thing, but then going off and doing obstetrics and learning a different speciality is a totally different, it's a totally different thing. Whilst we just do a little bit when we're doing our exams, there's a lot more to it. People don't realise how much is involved, but it's still fun. But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Yeah.
But look, I reckon that's great. I mean, this is an introduction to horary. I probably could call it, something along the lines of how is horary astrology used? Where I might call it, where is my wallet?
Cool.
Where's Dave's wallet? That's what I call it. Where's Dave's wallet?
Better?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Look at that.
Can you see that?
Yes, I can see the escarpment right across.
And so if I pan you down, you can see there's the Leo gazebo. You see that?
Leo gazebo. So what we have here is a garden created by Richard Sterling that encompasses all of the astrological signs, not necessarily in order.
Can you see Capricorn over there?
So what are we looking at for Capricorn?
It says Garden of the Stars, and there's a light post, but that's the top of the Capricorn.
It's a bit hard to see from here. Oh, yes, I can see the light post there. Yes, okay.
So down there is the Capricorn stairway. It's a cracker to come back up after you've got to the bottom, I can tell you. But when you get to the top, you get the reward of the view.
Okay, so that's the whole point of being a mountain goat, basically.
Exactly.
Yes. What a beautiful
there's all these
garden.
lovely little decks and, And so behind me I've got the house here.
What a beautiful space.
Yeah, it's really lovely. So, yeah. All right, Dane, well.
All right.
So that's why we call the Blue Mountains blue, because it's got a blue hue.
Got a blue hue to them. That's exactly right. Even through this screen, which is not the greatest video, you can still see it quite well. So, all right. Well, look, I reckon we'll leave that one there. And thanks for all your stuff on horary today.